Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, as the case may be. As per usual, we have folks from all over the world on this call. Sisla in India, Bucky up in Toronto. Welcome, Ethan, and welcome to Conversations with Jack. So before I get started, just want to give a quick shout out to our sponsors, Sommelier.Finance. Please go to app.sommelier.finance today for the easiest way to add liquidity to Uniswap V3. And as always, we have also OmniFlix Media as a sponsor. OmniFlix just completed what I believe, Bucky, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, is the largest Cosmos network that's ever been put up.
As far as I know, 750 validators, like freaking psychopaths running Tendermint with hundreds of validators.
Who said Tendermint couldn't scale? So anyway, please go check out OmniFlix.network today to learn a little bit more about what they're working on. But it's a full service platform for creators to both manage and mint NFTs on top of large video and JPEG collections. So please go check that out. And today I am honored to have one of the co-founders of Cosmos, Bucky, on today. Ethan, do you want to tell us? I'm slipping into Bucky. I should be calling you Ethan. I'm sorry about that. But Ethan, do you want to tell us a little bit more about kind of what you're working on these days with Informal and Cephalopod and your various projects?
Yeah, sure. So thanks for having me. I'm honored to be here, and I'm happy to go by Bucky. I thought we retired the Ethan name long ago.
Well, I'm seeing Ethan below, which
for some reason I let it fly with Ethan. Google got on that my name is Bucky. Anyway, so Informal, so I'm the CEO of Informal Systems. So we're one of the core development teams in Cosmos. Our mission is verifiable distributed systems and organizations. So we focus a lot on formal verification, tooling, and products to make verification techniques more accessible to software engineering. So less in the realm of hardcore math and PhDs and so on, and just more part of the regular sort of life cycle of software development to sort of increase the quality and improve testing and things like that. So we've started doing a lot of audits in security audits in Cosmos and beyond, and we're using some of our formal verification tools to speed those along and help us uncover deeper, more complex bugs through model-based testing, where we basically build a model of the system, of the protocol in TLA Plus, and extract test cases from that and make it easier to explore the whole state space of a system rather than just sort of reading code. So that's what we do on the sort of verification front. We're also building tools in Rust for Cosmos. So we built Hermes, which is the IBC relayer, which is relaying, I think, most of the, or quite a bit of the IBC traffic today between Osmosis and many of the other blockchains and the Cosmos Hub and so on. So if your IBC packets are going through, you probably have a Hermes instance to thank. Anyone can run Hermes. So, feel free to spin one up if you're interested in that.
I think Hermes is substantially all of the traffic on the IBC network at this point, because you and the other major operators, that's what they're running. Yeah.
Cool. I know you put a lot of work into the Go relayer, which was sort of the foundation initially, but
I just hired another developer. I'm gonna get it updated to the latest 0.4.3 stuff, and hopefully start running it on a couple of networks. But it just needs a little testing off.
Yeah, but we never managed to get a team around it to maintain it beyond just
It happens. Bucky, you mentioned formal verification, and I think folks don't really have a clear understanding of what that is unless you're kind of deeply technical. And I do want to just pause on that a minute, because I think it's been one of the huge sort of unsung heroes of Cosmos. We talk a lot about all of the sort of Cosmos chains that are out there, all of these different implementations in different languages. We've got JavaScript bindings, we've got Rust bindings, we have more bindings coming out. And the protocol is defined in really a language agnostic way, which allows that. But really, in order to ensure correctness across a bunch of different implementations of the same protocol, having a formal model in something like TLA Plus, which is a system designed specifically for this tooling, really helps smooth things out. One example where I can think of where a team didn't do this and it led to sort of divergence between different language implementations is libp2p, where the Go and the Rust implementations are kind of divergent. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that model-based testing and how that's been kind of critical to IBC development and deployment?
Sure. Yeah. I would say in general, whenever you have multiple implementations, regardless of how much verification effort you're putting in, you're probably going to get divergences somewhere because it's just such a difficult task. But the goal is to at least surface those as quickly as possible, ideally in testing before you get to prod. And And people talk often about like, oh, this work is formally verified or whatever. There's no like singular stamp. It's not like a one and done. Oh, it's formally verified or it's not. It's really part of a process. And unless you're investing like many tens of millions of dollars and doing like NASA level critical systems, there isn't really a final stamp where like it's done, it's formally verified, and you don't touch it again. So in the sort of world we live in, where there's very rapid development and it's kind of a continuous process. There's no final, oh, it's formally verified or it's not. It's sort of part of the software development lifecycle to have that extra assurance. And so what we do with the model-based testing, so we develop a model of the protocol in not in a programming language, in a specification language. So TLA plus, that's specification language. You don't write programs in that. You write models of systems, of protocols, of programs. And what we can do from that is then we run a model checker, right? So if you specify your protocol in TLA plus, and then you specify properties that your protocol is supposed to satisfy, you can then use a model checker to check that the protocol actually does satisfy those properties, right? And that's good for protocol design, but that doesn't tell you anything about the software. And actually verifying software directly is a much more challenging and difficult task. So what we've developed is what we call model-based testing, which is a link between these TLA plus formal models of protocols and the actual software you're using, where we can use the model checker to actually generate complex test scenarios, essentially as JSON blobs that can then be consumed by the software as part of the integration test, essentially, right? And so through that way, we can start to get greater assurance over the quality of the software. I wouldn't call it formally verifying the code per se. It is using formal verification techniques to actually generate those test cases, but you can think about this as a much more advanced way of generating tests. So for instance, in IBC, just to go back to that example, when we were doing this for IBC back in, November or so, there's a bunch of code in the Go code base for setting up, for setting up different chains and testing them and trying to run IBC packets between them and so on. But it actually takes quite a bit of code to do that. And so if you're a developer and you say, hey, I just want to test out this scenario I thought of, you actually have to write quite a bit of boilerplate to get that scenario to materialize. Whereas in TLA
it's a huge pain in the neck.
It's a huge pain. And so in TLA plus, because you have a model of the protocol that doesn't have all this, programming and imperative development stuff sort of in your way, something that might take a few hundred lines of code in Go is more like 10 lines in TLA plus, right? And so then you can write, hey, I want to try out this scenario. I'm going to describe my scenario in mathematics, in logic, formal logic, and that might sound scary, but it's actually relatively simple once you learn the syntax. And then from that, we can generate a test case that we can then run through a Go, say, harness that, if we tried to write that thing in Go directly, it would have taken, a few hundred lines. Instead, it's 10 lines of TLA plus. And doing that, we were actually able to uncover bugs that weren't found by the test directly. So back in November, we were able to uncover a particular bug where you had 3 different chains talking to each other, and a particular trajectory of tokens resulted in some kind of bug that we were able to uncover through this. So we're trying to apply that kind of methodology more widely, both within Cosmos and also beyond. And that helps a lot with audits and uncovering issues, but also in compatibility across different implementations, because now if we have a Go implementation, we have a Rust implementation, but we have a formal model in TLA plus, we can generate tests from that model and run it against the different implementations. And then when someone comes along to build something in Haskell or JavaScript or whatever, we can run the same tests against those as well. So it's a really nice way to generate language agnostic tests from a formal model.
We do have a Haskell framework on top of Tendermint, do we not?
We do. It's called, I believe it's called Kepler as well.
Yes, it is.
On the Kepler wallet, so we're going to need to change one of those names. It was developed by the Foam team, so that's a pretty cool development. So if you're looking to build applications in Haskell on top of Tendermint, you should check that out on the Foam GitHub.
That's about the coolest shit you can do. But so you mentioned earlier, like, we're not like formal modeling traditionally used in sort of aerospace applications, and applications where if there's a software issue, you're stranded up in space, or your plane's going to go down. But we are building some mission critical systems here, which are sort of the base layer of money. And with blockchains, like, that is definitely something that we need to think about. One of the things I hear you talking a lot about is sort of the nature of money and sort of blockchains for good. And like, how we can use blockchains to not only replace the legacy banking system, but to kind of build something better. And when I first started in Cosmos, this is one of the things where I totally agree with the Cosmos folks, and it's something that we've kind of continued to talk about. Not only you, Sunny, there's a bunch of folks kind of in this ecosystem who are kind of banging this drum. We've come a long way in the last few years, but we've got a long way to go. And if you look at kind of the regulation that's happening now, it is, this fight is more critical than ever, I think.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, when we started Cosmos, like proof of stake was still kind of a new thing. Proof of stake validators hardly existed yet. Now they're a full-fledged business model. So, Informal is also running a proof of stake validator called Cephalopod. So we're only on Cosmos, Osmosis, Regen, but we're gearing up for a bunch of others. Really what we're interested in is kind of decentralizing the whole infrastructure of the internet, right? There's a lot of talk around initially with Ethereum or even with Bitcoin before about like, the world's computer and, there's going to be a single computer that will, host all of the world's computation, right? And obviously that's kind of crazy. And that's a lot like saying, 30 years ago, there's only going to be one mainframe to host all of the world's computations and not.
People thought that. People thought that.
Like, smart, intelligent, caring people think that there's only going to be one Ethereum blockchain for all the world's blockchain needs, right? So that's obviously crazy. And that was, the vision of Cosmos was about sovereignty and interoperability, right? So not only will we have millions of blockchains in every community, every city, every company, whatever it might be, we'll have this infrastructure to support them for security, transparency purposes, and so on, but that these different systems will also be interoperable with each other, and that there will be a new sort of business model emerging of proof of stake validators to help start to bring this to life. And we're seeing that now, that these validators are showing up and are validating all these different networks. And initially people were like, Cosmos will never make sense because every chain will have to put together its own validator set and build its own security, and that's not going to work, and so on. But clearly it's starting to work. And I think we still have a long way to go, right? I don't think proof of stake is sort of the all end all. I sort of envision this trajectory of moving from the, say, highly objective, global, pseudonymous proof of work mining towards more local, more subjective, more reputation-based, and maybe even more, more like local economics-based systems. And proof of stake is just sort of one step towards that. And maybe the next step is, proof of bandwidth, the kind of systems that Althea and others are working on for mesh nets and so on. And then the final step, at least in my mind, is the sort of like proof of plant, proof of produce, proof of local sustainable production capacity. And that's really what I'm hoping we're able to work towards over the next, say, 5 years or so.
With that in mind, what are you growing in your garden this season?
So I live in an apartment these days in Toronto. So that sucks because I don't. So we have a fig tree indoors, and we have a few things growing on the balcony, some tomatillos and basil and stuff. But at my place in Guelph, we have currants and a whole bunch of other perennials we've been making jam from. So we just finished up some currant jam, which was pretty awesome. We got a carrot tree out there and a few others.
Do love some currant jam. Those tomatillos sound fantastic as well. Tomatillo salsa is a standard in this household.
Yeah, good.
So, proof of bandwidth in these sort of kind of like next stages of proof of stake, I think are interesting. But also what I think is interesting is kind of the rest of the industry catching up to Cosmos in a way. There's a lot of talk about this sort of multi-chain, and, there's a lot of also discussion around the centralized nature of a multi-sig controlling a lot of these Ethereum contracts, and like, how do we decentralize that? Yeah. This is a common criticism of Polygon and Optimism, is that those systems are essentially controlled by a multi-sig over on Ethereum. That bridge, that choke point between the main chain and that side chain is controlled by a single multi-sig. And the solutions that they're proposing to sort of get past that look a lot like Tendermint, and in some cases are Tendermint.
Yeah. Well, I think this is part of what's so cool about what you guys are doing with Sommelier, and sort of proving that you can start to decentralize the control over these Ethereum contracts using a Cosmos-based chain. Cosmos as a way to scale Ethereum, as a way to scale Bitcoin, these were always sort of part of the vision. And you hear more and more people talking, like, 5 years ago, we were like, application specific blockchains. Everyone was like, no, you're nuts. That's never going to happen. That doesn't work. It won't be secure, blah, blah, blah. Now it's like accepted fact, more or less, that this is how we scale Ethereum. This is how we scale with application specific chains, L2s, roll-ups, whatever. And so seeing that start to be proven out and seeing everyone start to wrestle with the challenges that creates with respect to, interoperability between these things, naming, the, path dependence of tokens across the different roll-ups or chains, like these are the real kind of social issues, and scaling isn't just a purely technical thing. It's actually very much a social thing. And when we forget that, when we pretend that scaling is just technical, we end up with, the Facebooks and the Googles and these like highly centralized, maybe architecturally decentralized, but politically very centralized, oligarchs basically. So it's really important to keep in mind the sort of social aspect of scalability. And that was, very much always part of the Cosmos vision of understanding that, hey, scaling things is really a social thing. And if you can't put together a secure validator set for your application, like, maybe your application shouldn't exist yet or something, or you'll have to sacrifice your sovereignty to the Ethereum main chain and so on. So it's really important to keep in mind that, these aren't just technical problems. There's a huge social side to this as well.
That's really another huge sort of thread in Cosmos that we're trying to iterate on organizational dynamics as well. Not only this whole having 10 different core team organizations that are each working on different parts of the protocol and trying to do that, but also within each of those organizations, Peggy JB is sort of an effort at that. But, I think that what you're doing at Informal with the co-op business model is one of the most interesting sort of iterations on that I've seen in the blockchain space. And there's very few people who actually like live that. There's a lot of people who talk a big decentralization game, but when it comes up to giving 5% of their company up, they're really squeamish. Do you want to talk a little bit more about the co-op business model and kind of what you guys are working on at Informal? Because that's really exciting.
Yeah, I'd love to. So yeah, thanks for calling that out, because there is a lot of talk out there of, people are like, oh, decentralized, but then, they retain control of their company. Or the other thing I'm seeing, just because this has been on my mind, is like these crypto companies that refuse to accept crypto as payments. And that just drives me nuts. It's like, what are we doing here? If you're trying to be a crypto company and building, the next generation of crypto, like if you're not going to accept Ether or Bitcoin or whatever, or at least a stable coin, like, to hell with you. So,
it's so much easier. It's drastically easier.
I mean, it's a pain in the ass, like bookkeeping wise. You may have to pay for another bookkeeper or something, but if you can't do that, then just get out of the room,
Well, so you have to.
We walk the walk, or we walk the talk, or whatever the expression is, and we pay the overhead for it, but it's worth it. A lot of that is, frankly, because we have Ariane, who is just like the best crypto operator, I think, in the space. She's our COO, and my partner. I've been working with her for years now. So she handles
Ariane's fantastic. And by the way, Gary,
she may help a lot of this, the co-op stuff and the operations of Informal happen. But as far as the cooperative structure, so we did a lot of research on cooperative structures and alternative corporate structures. We published a blog post about it. You can check it out on the Informal Systems blog. It's called Informal Owners. There's a lot of good sort of background research in there. We decided not to go with a statutory co-op. So legally, we're not considered a cooperative by the government of Ontario or otherwise.
Oh, interesting.
And we did that for a number of reasons. You can read about that in there, mostly because of the overhead and we wanted more flexibility and to be able to experiment. But internally, we are structured like a cooperative in terms of our shareholder agreements and our bylaws. So we basically separated our voting shares from our economic shares. So we have what are called informal shares, which are the membership shares in the cooperative. So every employee gets one of those. And those give you a right to vote, right? So it's one person, one vote once you've been with the company for 9 months. And, the main thing they vote on is the board of directors who elects the CEO. And, right now I've been elected the CEO, but essentially at any time, if I piss off enough employees or go rogue or whatever the case may be, they can just oust me, right? And then there's the economic shares, which we call uncommon shares rather than your normal, common shares. So, does humor belong in corporate law? Yes, absolutely.
Yes, 100%. Absolutely.
So we're trying to innovate here and there and trying to have fun with it. But at the end of the day, I mean, if people have a bit of a misconception about how cooperatives work and the idea that like, you really have to come to consensus on every single decision and that's going to slow things down. That's not really true. At the end of the day, we function very much like any other corporation. There's a CEO, there's whatever level of hierarchy you need. We happen to have a relatively flat organization. We can talk about how we structure that. But in the last analysis, the major difference is who the CEO is accountable to, right? And in a normal company, the CEO is accountable to the shareholders, and the largest shareholder is usually the CEO, the founder of the startup. In our case, the CEO is accountable to the members, which are the employees, right? And so that's where the final accountability lies, and who the CEO is performing for, and who has say over them.
That's a really common criticism of the model that you just touched on there, is that, I hear a lot of people say this about Cosmos too, like, who's in charge? Who's actually getting stuff done? Don't you guys just sit around and debate all day? And it's like, no, not really. Like, what really happens is a bunch of people do work, and then we get together to like kind of figure out how to make that work match up. And in reality, there are leaders. And I think that that's something that confuses people about decentralization. Is like, well, isn't decentralization something without leaders? It's like, no, the leaders just have checks and balances on them. Exactly. And, this is a natural way of organizing humans. We just need to figure out how to scale it. And, I think that when we're talking about money and co-ops, a common next thing to talk about would be kind of community banking. And I've done a couple of shows recently on Cosmos Cash. I had Andrea from the team there to talk legal and regulatory, and Alessio came on and talked a little bit of the technical stuff. But this whole idea of community banking on top of a blockchain is something that has been a hobby horse of yours for a very long time.
Yeah, so it was a good segue there. I am kind of obsessed with the notion of complementary currencies or local currencies. They are another way to think about them, and what they're really doing is liquidity saving, which is sort of another way of framing the core functionality there. When you think about money and what money is supposed to be in the blockchain space and the blockchain industry, we think a lot about the store of value function. Ethereum these days is obsessed with ultrasound money with the EIP 1559 upgrade, and Bitcoin was obviously pitched that way. I think I wrote a tweet thread about this a few weeks ago, but I think we've kind of misunderstood the core function of money, which is that it is a means of exchange, right? It is a means to facilitate exchange. And when those exchange networks break down, where they're not working as well, where there's less trust going around, that's when the store of value becomes really important as sort of a hedge against the ability to exchange, right? And so, one quip is that, well, actually, the best money is the friends you made along the way, because if you think about like where money comes from, it's a sort of, externalization of the tit for tat that happens with your friends and with and so on, just extending that into a larger kind of network of strangers, right? So obviously it's important that money is able to store value, because you're not going to be able to just exchange things tit for tat with people, forever, especially in more and more complex societies. But I think we've largely lost sight of that core exchange functionality in the blockchain space, arguably because, it's harder to raise money for that kind of thing or make money off of it. But, we're hoping that we can start to get back to that. But there are a number of projects that have been working specifically on enabling credit clearing and exchange processes between businesses. And so I'll call it a few. So the Veerbank, which has been around since the 30s in Switzerland, was started after the Great Depression, is a mutual credit system. It's basically a cooperative of businesses that are able to issue credit to those businesses to then trade with one another, right? And that credit is basically, it's not exchangeable for, but it is pegged to the Swiss franc. And that basically allows this sort of anti-cyclical component to the Swiss economy, that when there's a liquidity crunch or it's difficult to get access to francs, that these businesses can cooperate with each other to basically issue this alternative medium of exchange to continue to be able to trade, right? So the key is, the money holds this function of a means of exchange that allows people to still trade with each other, right? Even if they don't have access to some larger nation state currency, US dollar or whatever, you could mint vouchers and start using them, so long as there are available resources, unused resources, and unmet needs. You want, it's this matchmaking functionality, right? And so there have been a few other projects. There's Sardex in Sardinia. There's the Sarafu network in Kenya with their community inclusion currencies by Grassroots Economics, who've had a lot of success out there doing this kind of mutual credit thing. And I think this is really the key use case that we need to be focused on to really empower small businesses and local economies and communities to actually fight back against, the ravages of globalization and these huge multinationals and so on. And I think the blockchain space can play a huge role in that. And we don't even need currencies, right? There was this amazing paper that came out earlier this year about liquidity saving through obligation clearing, right? That basically shows that, if I owe you money, Jack, and you owe Zaki money, and Zaki owes me money, none of us need to come up with any coins, right? We can just clear that, right? If I owe you $1, you owe me $1, he owes me $1, right? And so you can call that liquidity saving, right? And that's a straightforward concept, and people are familiar with the idea of clearinghouses and so on. So this is kind of similar to that. But you can do this, and banks use this all the time. I mean, this is how banks save themselves literally trillions of dollars in liquidity by just clearing, right? But this kind of functionality isn't really accessible to smaller businesses. Oh. And the technology we're building, this blockchain tech, can really start to make it more accessible by reducing the cost to actually running these systems. And this paper showed that if you take a liquidity saving system like a credit clearing system like we're talking about and mutual credit, you can save businesses up to 50% of their liquidity requirements, which is basically like slashing their expenses by in half, which could be a huge benefit to small businesses, especially as they're being crushed by the pandemic and so on. So these are the kinds of use cases, the kinds of things that I'm so excited about. It's seeing the technology actually used for, and then I'm hoping more people will look at and pay attention to and work on, because I think we're undergoing a monetary revolution with crypto. It's only really just starting. We're still kind of stuck in the store of value narrative, and even with proof of stake, and there's still so much further to go to create more local economies, more local monies, and sort of a greater hierarchy or web of currencies, rather than just be stuck in these like global US dollar or euro kind of mindset.
There's a couple of things that brings to mind for me. First off is if folks who are watching this have not read Debt the First 5,000 Years, I think that's a great introductory piece to some of these topics around sort of mutual credit and things like that. Have you read that one, Bucky?
I haven't read it, no.
It's interesting. It's a lot of out there.
Yeah,
it would be nothing new for you. And then in the U.S., some of these organizations that exist to this day are farming cooperatives that will lend between members and play this kind of counter-cyclical role. This isn't some crazy anarchist fantasy. These are organizations that have been functioning for hundreds of years. And another reason why I think some of the market penetration there is a little difficult is because those organizations are very human-based, and a lot of the systems that they've been using are very old. And reaching those folks, helping them update that, and bringing them better technology and better tools is something that we need to do as an industry. So we're kind of coming here towards the end of the 30 minutes, so I do want to go ahead and answer a couple of audience questions.
Sure.
So let's see here. Pramid Rohit, who, by the way, Pramid, also thank you for staying up. I appreciate it. Asks excellent questions every show. Hi, Jack, and hello, Ethan. Thank you for this. What do you think the role of blockchain with DAOs in a future where every community can become self-sustainable?
Pretty broad question. I think there's a
yes, it is.
For this technology, for blockchains and DAOs. I mean, I think of every blockchain kind of as a DAO in and of itself. If the goal is to make our political institutions more representative of their actual citizenry, right? And so right now we have elections every 4 years or whatever. It's kind of a mockery of the pace of change and of the amount of information that we're trying to process as a society. So at least I'm hoping that these networks and this technology helps to actually enable us to better manage our communities, our cities, and so on, and to participate in more meaningful ways. And again, this isn't to say that the whole city is going to come to consensus on every decision. That's obviously ludicrous and unscalable and is not going to work. But to enable more experiments and more liquid sorts of democracy and so on. So I think these technologies and networks have a huge role to play in our communities becoming more self-sustainable and in developing relationships between them. So that's the whole idea behind IBC, was to enable interoperability between otherwise sovereign communities who are able to express their own values but still interoperate with others.
Cool. Okay, Crypto Kraktos asks, hi Ethan. Like you said, if Cosmos blockchain can back multiple smart contracts across multiple networks, how do you see validation for temporary chains that might pop up?
Cool. So I think temporary chains or little baby chains are an exciting topic that
baby blockchain. Baby blockchains
that haven't quite materialized yet, but I think it's coming with the shared security work that's happening for Cosmos, the sort of interchain staking protocols. I think we'll start to see application specific and time specific chains pop up that are only that emerge for a particular use case for a particular amount of time and then disappear. So you can think about right now, like the Cosmos community pool will basically pay out funds to a multi-sig, and then it's up to that multi-sig to spend those funds, and then the account is empty, right? But you could imagine that we start using independent blockchains for that purpose, where instead of a multi-sig, maybe those people are the validator set for that chain, and that chain has, you know, additional rules for how the fund should be governed. And then once the funds are all spent, then the chain would sort of dissolve and disappear. And so once that the interchain staking functionality is more available, I think we'll start to see a lot more of that kind of experimentation with these chains popping up, and maybe chains will start to merge together in the future, and then disappearing when their time is up.
Blockchain mergers, I think we saw the first one of those this year with the Key protocol folks and the Orchid protocol, I believe. Kind of an interesting topic. And one other thing on that item, we also have the groups module coming up from Regen Network. And I also know Kava has developed a module called the committee module. There's a lot of DAO tooling coming out for Cosmos chains. And, you know, as kind of one of the first major DAOs that ended up working, the Cosmos Hub and the Cosmos SDK in general, you know, powerful tooling that's going to enable a lot more creativity with the community pools. Well, Bucky, that brings us to the end of our 30 minutes and action packed there. So thank you very much for joining. Anything that you'd like to plug before you leave?
Yeah, check out Informal Systems. Check out Cephalopod, our validator, Cephalopod equipment. And, you know, if you're looking for security audits for your blockchain system, reach out to us. And if you're looking for validators to run on your network, reach out to us. And, you know, check out TLA Plus, check out our software, and Cosmos.
Cosmos. I got a threshold signer for you. So anyway, thank you very much, Bucky, for joining us. And also thank you to Sommelier Finance. We're going to be launching a mainnet here within the next couple of weeks. I think we've got some really cool communications coming out around that. Also, the advances we've made on the Uniswap v3 seller contract that we've been working on. So please go check that out. And again, OmniFlix Media with that giant testnet coming out with a mainnet here soon as well. So please be on the lookout for more news from OmniFlix Media. All right. Well, we will see you guys next week. And let's see, do we have a guest for next week? Not yet. We're going to find one, though. So I will see you next Friday. And thank you very much.
Awesome. Thanks a lot.